Yes, and thanks. I started recording this session, so don't forget. And Laura, you want to make sure that you keep your mic muted for the WebEx. And are you dialed in with your phone? Okay, we still have a lot of people joining. Just wanted to let you know we're going to be delivering this via webinar format for those of you joining just now. Your mics will be muted, so we can't hear you when you ask questions, but when we will be having you chat with us via the chat feature in WebEx, which you can get to by hitting the bubble icon when you move your mouse onto the WebEx screen. It's just to the left of the three dots. That way you can chat with us through that.
Okay, I'd like to welcome everybody to the first series of Faculty Senate sponsored lectures. We're calling this the SIP lecture. We have speakers. Our first speaker is Dr. Dawn. In field of virology, Harvard University for international enrollment management at Wright State University. He started in this mention, he oversees international or UDIE. Don Harlow is a proud alumnus of Wright State. He graduated from the International Studies program with a focus on peace and diplomacy. He later continued his education at Franklin University in marketing. Harlow grew up in Italy, where most of his family have been fighting. And his presentation, which will be second this afternoon, will be illustrating the changes that were adopted in recruitment, and he will also reflect on the timeline when these changes happened based on Italy's.
Okay, thank you, Laura. This is Dawn Woolley, and I'm very pleased to be kicking off our Shelter-in-Place lectures hosted by the Wright State Faculty Senate. We chose coronavirus as the topic because it is the one that is dominating our lives at the current time. And everyone is affected by this currently with the pandemic. Today, I would like to talk about what is a coronavirus, where did it come from, how do we get it? How do we know we have it? And do we need to take this seriously? Also, how does it cause disease? And what can we do about it? Coronavirus is actually a whole family of viruses, and there are viruses in this family that infect animals and humans. There are 7 coronaviruses that infect humans, 4 of which simply cause a common cold. 3 other ones cause more serious disease. The virus that we're dealing with right now in the current pandemic has been officially named SARS-CoV-2 due to its similarity with the original SARS virus. The COVID-19 actually refers to the disease. It just simply is an acronym for Coronavirus Disease 2019 because that's when it started. In the lower right-hand corner of the screen, you can see an electron microscope picture of the coronavirus. Corona stands for crown, and that's how these viruses originally got their family name. When you look at it under the microscope, it looks like a crown because there are large protein spikes sticking out on the outside of it. When a new microbe comes on the scene, we want to know where it came from. And so generally what we do is we sequence the genome of the new organism and we compare it to other organisms that we have the sequence from. In this case, the new virus is 88% related to 2 bat coronaviruses. It is 79% related to the original SARS coronavirus and 50% related to the MERS virus, which is the Middle East Respiratory Syndrome virus. So the current thinking is that the new virus originally came from bats. That would be the animal reservoir for the new virus. And they also believe that for the SARS original virus and the MERS, that the reservoir is also a bat species. But there are intermediary host animals that can transmit the disease to humans. For the 2019 outbreak, we want to know how the virus got from the animal to the human. And so there are 2 possible sources for this. We believe that it came from Wuhan, China, simply based on the epidemiology. When a new disease breaks out, you look at where the initial cases occurred, and then you're like a detective. You're tracing every case back to the original source. So that's why we believe it came from Wuhan, because the initial cases broke out there, and then the spread could be traced back to Wuhan. Now, there's a couple possible ways that the virus could have gotten from the animal species to the human. There is a live animal market in this city, and there are some very exotic animals there, and that may have been the source, how it transmitted from animals to humans. There is also some suspicion about a biosafety level 4 lab in Wuhan. There is no evidence whatsoever that they synthesized this or intentionally released it. But this laboratory had been studying SARS viruses ever since the original outbreak in 2002. And that would make sense because they want to learn about it and study new SARS viruses, isolating them from different animals. So it is possible, in theory, that it was from the lab by accident, where maybe a laboratory worker got infected or there was some other type of release. And this has happened before, where there have been lab-acquired infections for other diseases. Now, they do believe, again, that the possible origin is bats. And for the new SARS virus, I'm showing on the right-hand side is a pangolin, which is like an exotic, scaly anteater type of an animal. And they think that may have been the intermediary host between the humans and the bats. How do we get it? When someone sneezes, you can see here that many droplets are expelled. And toward the bottom, some of the droplets are very large and they're falling out very quickly to the ground. But at the top, some of the droplets seem to be flying up into the air and being carried by the air currents. The smaller droplets will become dried out before they hit the ground, and then the virus would be left floating in the air. Whereas the larger droplets would fall to the ground before they dry, and then they would dry on the ground and be mixed in with things like dust. studies at the National Institutes of Health showed that the virus could survive for up to 3 hours in the air. So we know that one source of transmission is respiratory droplets. Fomites are another. Now, a fomite is an inanimate object like dust or some object that can transmit the disease indirectly. The virus has been found in respiratory secretions and saliva, and there has been shedding noted in the stool, but it is uncertain at this point what role that would play in the transmission. In the original SARS outbreak of 2002, they did find through investigation that that virus was spread in some high-rise apartment complexes through the sewer system. So there may have been some leakage from pipes that contributed to the transmission in one of those apartment complexes. How do we know we have it? So COVID-19 presents with a high fever. It would be over 100.4 degrees or greater than 99.6 degrees Fahrenheit if you're over 60. It would have a non-productive dry cough and a shortness of breath, myalgia, muscle pain or fatigue. Now, less common, someone might have a pharyngitis, a headache, a productive cough, gastrointestinal symptoms, or hemoptysis. For a further diagnosis, the preferred specimen would be an upper respiratory specimen, a nasopharyngeal specimen. So this is what, when we're watching these drive-through testing sites and they're putting the swab up the nose, that's what they're trying to obtain. So that's the preferred specimen. Also, one could test the blood specimen. The tests that we're hearing about in these drive-through sites that they're working on quickly are the real-time reverse transcriptase RT-PCR tests. This is a test that is trying to detect the genetic material of the virus, and it would show an active infection. They did some whole genome sequencing initially to identify the virus in the beginning. Now, serology shows the presence of antibodies. This would indicate that someone has had an immune reaction against the virus, and this would detect someone who had previously been exposed or has recovered from the infection. And they can also provide some of these antibodies, as we'll talk about later, in the treatment to help other infected people. An ELISA assay is an enzyme-linked immunosorbent assay, and these can be set up to detect either a protein from the virus or an antibody. And then lastly, you could try to culture the virus from the blood sample. Do we need to take it seriously? Absolutely, yes. This disease is highly contagious and deadly. As of late last night, I was looking at the numbers and they have probably already changed. So in just 3 months, we have 1.5 million confirmed cases, over 88,000 deaths, and 184 countries and regions affected. You may have heard the term in the news, the R0, and that's shown over here on the right. What this refers to is how many people get the infection from any given one person. Initially, they estimated that for this new SARS virus, this was a 2.5. So for every infected person, 2.5 people would get infected. Now, some more recent estimates are showing a number possibly as high as 6. So it may be more contagious than we initially thought, but that is one of the reasons why it is spreading so fast. And then lastly, what we have learned at the bottom of the slide, you can see that people who are asymptomatic, they have no idea they have the infection, no fever, no symptoms, they are shedding the virus and transmitting it during this time. So all of these factors make it very highly contagious. How does it cause disease? So this virus grows in the lining of the respiratory tract and it kills cells. When cells die, they break open and release their contents, and that causes a lot of inflammation. In some cases, we see a severe pneumonia form. And then cytokine production and inflammation cause cells and fluid to build up in the lung. And a cytokine is a very small protein produced by immune cells that helps the immune cells communicate with each other. Now, in the news media, they're referring to the cytokine storm, and that's what they're referring to, is the release of these proteins. And also, in some cases, people can get a secondary bacterial infection. The incubation time ranges from 2 to 12 days. The average is about 6 days. So this is why there is the 14-day quarantine period. We want to get just past the 12-day mark to make sure that if someone is coming out of quarantine, that they do not have the infection. Death is the result of progressive respiratory failure in about 1 to 10% of cases. Now, this is a very wide range for the case fatality. And the reason for that is that these are based on estimates, and there may also be geographic differences. There could be strain differences in different countries. So the case fatality rate is obtained by taking the number of deaths and dividing it by the number of cases. So the number of cases would be the denominator, but we don't exactly know that number, so we just have an estimate. We haven't tested everybody, and as I mentioned, there are a lot of asymptomatic cases. And then the numerator, which is the number of deaths, we still don't quite have an exact handle on that because some of the deaths are not being counted accurately or they're not being reported. So what can we do about it? So we could break the chain. So this is the chain of infection shown here. So one would have to have the agent, which is the virus, in an infected host. It has to have an exit point from that host. It has to leave. It has to have a way to spread. It has to have an entry point for a new host, and that new host has to be susceptible. So if you break any single link in this chain, you can stop the infection. For example, we can quarantine infected people. Exit point. This is why they want someone infected to wear a mask so they don't expel those droplets. Means of spread, social distancing, watching objects that you're touching, the hand hygiene. Entry point, this is why now there's a recommendation for a face covering. We'll talk about that later. And susceptible hosts. We know that certain age groups, in particular the elderly, are very susceptible. So we want to protect those people even more. Masks. This is very controversial. And in fact, even the experts really can't agree. And we've gotten many mixed messages from the media on this. And even myself, I'm a little bit frustrated by some of those mixed messages. But the current recommendation is to, if possible, it's a recommendation, to cover your face in public. And on this slide, I have a range of different types of options, where at the top, you could have a cloth face cover, or you could have a surgical mask shown in the top right, or you could then have a respirator. That's the N95 that we hear a lot about, and that's shown in the middle picture on the right. And then lastly, you could have a powered air purifying respirator. As you go down this list, you get an increasing protection, an increasing level of protection. When you start to get into the use of respirators, and this is why there is some warning to the public, you have to know how to use them properly. You should be fit tested for it and be trained on how to use it. And in some cases, people may have breathing problems, so they should really have a medical clearance to wear them, especially if they're wearing them for extended time periods. And there's also training on the use of them. If they're not used properly, for example, you could contaminate yourself. They're really not meant to be reused, but since we are reusing them, you have to be careful now that the outside is dirty and the inside is clean as you take it off and put it back on. So how can we protect ourselves? Well, we should stay at home until the order is lifted. The social distancing is set at 6 feet. And this is for those droplets. If people are just talking and breathing, the 6-foot distance should protect us from those droplets. Now, if there's a really explosive sneeze or cough, it could go beyond that, but the social distancing is for the normal activities. We also now are seeing extreme hand hygiene, more hand washing than ever, the hand sanitizer, and you don't want to touch your face because if you're touching contaminated objects and then touching your face, you're actually potentially inoculating yourself with the virus. As I mentioned, the particles that are large that someone expels drop to the floor and fall into the dust. So it would be a good idea to leave things like shoes at the door, and also just to be careful with items entering the house, like from the grocery store that you're buying. You would want to wipe things down if possible. And your mail, for example, when you go to the mailbox or when you get boxes, there's a lot of online ordering right now, so people don't have to go to the store. So you can leave the boxes outside, for example. Now, there is no vaccine. We hope that they will have one, but it takes a while to develop new vaccines. And there is no approved treatment for any of the SARS viruses. So right now, we have some experimental drugs and treatments. We're hearing a lot about the hydroxychloroquine plus the azithromycin. Now, this is a drug that has been used for malaria and other diseases like lupus. That's an autoimmune disease. And it has actually shown, and I've given one reference, and I have some additional references. If you would like to send me an email, I can mail those to you, where there is some antiviral effect. So I mentioned that there's a lot of inflammation in the lungs. So this drug may help to modulate that inflammation, inhibit the virus, and then the azithromycin may come in to inhibit the secondary bacterial infection. This drug has been used for many decades, and it could be scaled up very quickly, and it's cheap, and it's accessible. There are some very promising new treatments like the remdesivir, and that's a drug that would block the replication, block the virus's ability to copy itself. And that's very promising, but it will still take a little bit longer to scale that one up. The convalescent plasma is people who have recovered from the COVID-19. We can take their antibodies and give them to other people who are infected, and that seems to be working. There's another drug listed here, the Canostat mesylate, which is a possible entry blocker. That is an encephalitis drug that may block that virus from entering the cell. And then second to the bottom, there are two tongue twisters right here, and these are monoclonal antibodies that also help to block that inflammation that I talked about. And then there are many other drugs being tested. And I've given a few references at the bottom, and I have more if you would like those. So I would like to thank you for listening, and I'm going to end my presentation with these two photos, one from the 1918 influenza outbreak, and one from the SARS in 2003, which is very reminiscent of what we're seeing now. So despite all of our technology, we are still relatively helpless against these new viruses. When a new virus enters a species for the first time, it can be very aggressive, and we have no immunity against it. We will be taking questions after the second presentation, but if you do not get one of your questions answered or you would like some additional information, I have my email address at the bottom of this slide. At this time, I will pass the presentation over to my colleague.
Thank you very much, Dr. Woolley. Well, Giancarlo, attending the chat box in order to submit questions for both Dawn and Giancarlo to be able to address. Toward the bottom part of your screen, and you'll see all of the presenters. Possible.
I'm having issues here. Oh, here it is. Can you hear me? All right, I'm sorry. All right. Um, so my name is Giancarlo Mariani. I am the Associate Director for International Enrollment Management in the University Center of International Education. So my presentation is not going to be as technical, as scientific and great as Don was. I just wanted to give you guys a little bit of a perspective, a Wright State perspective onto what has happened in these past weeks. And also to give you a little bit of a perspective from an Italian that has an enormous amount of family that is being affected right now and actually has had issues for quite some weeks. So when we begin our recruitment efforts for this upcoming spring season, we had a very good plan. We actually were starting with, these are just a list of the things that we actually had. We not only the UCIE, but also our partners abroad in Turkey and in India were going to attend an enormous amount of different tours and college visits and one-on-one sessions and visits to agents. If you think about it and you look over here, we started with China having a little bit of a worrisome, especially towards January, because that's where the crisis began. But at this point, everything was going, and seemed like everything was going to be fine. Now, once it's hit towards the end of February, even if everything was on the plate, we had this misconception that once the warm weather was going to come in, we would be fine. And we were attending all these comforting webinars that were telling us how, the COVID-19 is not as lethal or as bad as what we've had in the past. Influenza has done much more damage than COVID-19. So we don't need to worry about our trips. We don't need to worry about our recruitment. It should all be fine. Now I have a section over there that says family in Italy. This is where my family started giving me a little bit of a worry. There was the north that started seeing it, and it was rapidly increasing and increasing and increasing, and it was just this unease sensation that you were getting from your family. And I have family from the top of the boot all the way down to the heel. So it was from north to south. The message was the same. This does not seem like it's going to go away. I don't know, you should be traveling. So then March 5th rolls around. And this is where Italy starts closing their schools. I get a message from my nephew that started his freshman year in college in Rome, and they sent us home. They told us that we have to do everything online. And Wright State was very good and very prepared to be making that transition from in-person to online. However, in Italy, that was something that is not conventional. Not every school is capable or have the bandwidth to be able to have on live virtual events. So it was a massive push, and it was an overnight idea. Now this is starting, it seemed like from that Italy closure of the schools, it just became a chain reaction. So study abroad, we had to make sure that our students were safe, not only here in the States, but also abroad. So we did everything that we could, and the study abroad team did incredible to make sure to accommodate all of our students here and abroad. Then we had to create a work from home situation. We had to make sure that our admissions team was going through the same steps and that it could be as seamless as possible to create the environment that they needed to be able to process all the applications that we normally process. So we had to figure out our gear, but we also had to implement teams as a group to be able to communicate with each other when the applications issues are starting. But also we need to make sure that we talk to each other at least once a day, or at least continuously, seamlessly, so that everything is just like if we were in the office. So right now, essentially what we have is instead of having somebody coming into my office and asking me a question or going to another office to ask a question, they will turn around and chat on Teams. It's almost like I don't know, a high-tech door. How about that? We also started looking at surrogate solutions. So the surrogate solution was trying to find people that will go into the tours and to represent Sinclair. I'm sorry, Wright State. So once we do have that option to go and talk to, have somebody to go and talk for Wright State, we started looking at places. Shortly and very briefly, these options dropped down because the COVID-19 was starting to becoming more and more and more and more like a pandemic. At this point, March 15 comes around, Italy is shut down, and we are completely, all of our recruitment is canceled. I like to mention just one tour that was canceled, and it was canceled for Brazil, and it was canceled because the people just did not want to have, these schools did not feel safe to having people from other nations to come and talk to their kids. So it wasn't just the worry or the pandemic that came in. It's just as this is where people just started scrambling and trying to adapt. And we adapted as well. We converted all of our recruitment in admissions into an office, in a home office. We became armchair recruiters, and armchair became our friend. We converted our fairs, our college fairs have become virtual fairs. Our one-on-ones with students have pretty much become webinars. And we are right now doing a ton of them. Our partner abroad has done set up at least 4 of them for us, and I believe we have another 3 for our the one I'm based in Turkey. So we are definitely making sure that we make a social media presence, and we don't do that just on Facebook, but we're trying to do that on Twitter and a little bit on Instagram as well. This is not just by posting or just making visible or commenting or responding to people. We turned around and made our Operation Virtual USCIE, essentially. Our programming is online. Our live events are online. We make sure, I personally have had one-on-ones with students online using WebEx. So everything has gone online. The virtual admissions team is like I was saying. We can go ahead and use Teams as to exchange of thoughts and trying to strategize for our admissions days or just what we're going to do in the near future. Now, moving forward is where we are going to attempt different things. So we're going to try to make a close connection with all the college departments. This is by inviting them to events and by pretty much putting them on a stage to show the world what great faculty Wright State has. We need to emerge from the noise. Obviously, we are not the only school that is actually wanting to recruit international students and that wants to make an impression. So we need to do targeted posts in pinpoint essentially what the information is going out and what actually students are worried about right now. We need to be not only emotionally intelligent, but also digitally intelligent. We need to make sure to understand what the student is needing, and we need to make sure to answer it in the correct way. We have to understand that right now we are in a stay-at-home order. We are, in one way, we are fortunate, but there are people that are stuck in their houses. They have been there for weeks, and we need to make sure to keep that in consideration in any communication that is going out. Just to get it in a happier note, I have had a Nepalese student that has contacted us through our WhatsApp, and it was an off time, and I just was like, what time is it back there? It's 4 o'clock in the morning. Yeah, you're locked at home. There's not that much that you can do. So you need to be able to understand that that situation is coming. So when even you're ready to log off to go to your family because your day is done, you need to be able to make sure that that student is going to be fine with you leaving your desk. Now, live events are no longer live. We can't be in person. We can't see each other. it would be very weird if everybody's going to be in an arena and everybody's applying social distancing. I would really like to see that. So everything is going live and using platforms like WebEx, but also Facebook Live is going to be our friend. We want to make sure that our students are shown and are promoted around the world. We have a great student body, and we need to show it to everybody. And we need to make sure that those students abroad are able to make a connection with the ones here with us. Now, I wanted to show you guys a little bit of what we've done. So the picture over here on the top left, that is a webinar that Dr. Raymer has done for us in partnership with our partner abroad, Poor Singal in India. This is the first one that we have done. It was very successful. Dr. Raymer actually wanted to take this opportunity to thank him because this was actually, it was awesome. It just, you could tell that the professor was extremely passionate about the topic. And this was helping not only Wright State students, it is putting the brand out there, but it's for Education USA. And for Education USA, you're helping students not only for Wright State, but for anyone that wants to come to the United States. And us as international educators, we're very thankful that Dr. Raymer actually stepped up. And we hope that we can see so many more that come up and actually help us with these type of webinars. We also created, and this is actually something that the student workers that have collected this information for us. So sorry if it cut out a little bit, but over here on the left, you will see a post that was on our page, on our Facebook page, on our admissions page. And this is where the student has essentially told us what the situation is right now and how it is being able to Wright State for adjusting. It is important to us to show students abroad that although the COVID-19 is maybe closing our campus, it is not shutting us down. We are here and we are here to help, and we are here to help every single student. So it was important to me and to the UCA to promote our students and to show them what they're doing right now. We have also done live events. This is an example for our pizza event. I was the one that did it. We streamed it live on our UCIE page. And we find that, and it wasn't the first one, we actually had a student doing it, and we hope to do it more. And I'm sure that we're going to do it more. But it was one of those things at the end of the week where at least you could have a minute to sit on your phone and watch somebody that is familiar, that is giving you something that is not just an immense amount of information. I mean, just the fact of sitting there and being able to watch me playing with dough and messing up my pizza was fine. It turned out good though, I promise you that. Now, also I wanted to point out this over here, and this is also made from one of our student workers. We thought that it is not fair, it is not good to make fun of the virus. It is not, but it is important that we show our students that laughter is important. Again, we need to think about students that are staying at home, that are closed in their doors. If we can give them one smile, just one smile, we've made a victory for that day. And if we do get that one smile in a perspective of recruiting, they will more likely to remember our Wright State brand. So I hope that this was beneficial. I gave you a little bit of a perspective. I wanted to assure everybody that my family back home is all fine. We were lucky enough that my small town did not get completely affected by the COVID-19, but it's there. So stay safe and stay home. Now, any questions, I'm free to answer.
This is Dawn Woolley. I am seeing some questions come in, and I will go ahead and field a couple of questions in the order that they came in. One question is, if one recovers from COVID-19, what do we know about their immunity, and how would that immunity compare to someone who has received a vaccine when developed? So if someone recovers from COVID-19, they have some immunity. We don't know how long that immunity will last, but they would have immunity at least in the short term. That's one of the things we have to study is the memory response. If someone is vaccinated, they will also be protected and develop a memory response, but we don't know how long that will last either. Now, in general, when someone recovers from a live infection, and even some vaccines that are live attenuated versions of the virus, that tends to be a stronger immune response than something like a killed vaccine, which would generate enough immunity to protect. But again, that natural infection generally gives a stronger immune response. And if I have not fully answered that, you can feel free to type in some follow-up questions. And I think there was another one here is, are there good stats on how much more susceptible someone with a pre-existing condition like an elderly person or someone with COPD or diabetes would be relative to a healthy person, like 2 or 3, whatever times more likely to die? Well, we're gathering that data right now, so I don't have the numbers at my fingertips, and I'm not sure anyone has accurate numbers right now. But from what I'm seeing, that people who are younger that end up in the hospital or the ICU or die, many of them do have pre-existing conditions. Not all of them, but some. I would predict that when the numbers are all in, that we will see that people with pre-existing conditions have a statistically significant higher rate of complications and death. I just don't know what the exact numbers will be yet. And Giancarlo, would you like to take a question or two?
Yes, sure. I've seen a few. Let me see. There was one. So the difference between how was the U.S. response to COVID-19 crisis differed from the response in Italy? The response, I have to say, was surprisingly slower. The prime minister, there was obviously in Italy, there was a little bit, they could have done something, they could have done it sooner. But once once they started seeing that there was many more cases coming in, the prime minister actually acted very decisively and started slowly closing down. We are fortunate that Ohio has a governor, in my opinion, at least, that has a governor that has stepped up and decided to follow the lead of the people that actually have the science behind them. Granted, I mean, I have to say that most of us, and I'm going to make a generalization that all of us kind of like undertook this, and I was trying to explain that in my presentation. We didn't really think of this as being that big of a deal. I remember saying the same thing to my family in Italy, but once it was real and we needed to do something, Italy stepped up and did it. And I really wanted to say that our governor has done the same, and I'm very grateful of it. Then there's large cultural differences that have been impacted by the COVID-19. Coming up, Friday is Good Friday, right? And Sunday is Easter. We're Catholic, it's kind of a big deal. So we are planning, for example, ourselves through some apps. I don't want to do any commercials here, but through some apps, we're pretty much trying to make a family dinner. I have some family here that we're going to do it, but we're going to do it also with Italy back home. And it's strange, but we're going to make it work. And the one big thing is the kissing and hugging. You know, Italians do 2 kisses, 1 on each cheek. We hug everything. We hug our walls if we could. It's been a struggle. I mean, a lot of the, one of the, what was it? I think on March 5th, when the schools were closed, the prime minister has made it clear that all college students should stay home and not to go see their grandparents. Now, it's already hard for every grandparent, but for an Italian grandparent, it's like, oh my God. So it definitely did crush a lot of souls there, but it slowly it became understood that it was needed. I don't see any
I could take a couple if you'd like.
other.
Searching.
Yeah, go for it, and I can go and find.
I see a question about what do we know about contamination on surfaces and what would you recommend we do with packages, items we purchase? So there can be surface contamination and it can spread that way. As I mentioned, if you touch a contaminated surface and then touch your face, you can inoculate yourself. There is there are data coming out on different types of surfaces. So on cardboard, some of the data says 24 hours and longer on plastic, like 3 days, and stainless steel, also maybe about 3 days. So what I recommend and what I'm doing is, for example, with my mail, I use gloves to get my mail and I open up the envelopes and I throw the outside away and I leave the contents sitting in my garage for 3 days. And then from there, I will bring it into the house if I need to pay certain bills. And another option for people is to just use the online billing to avoid the paper completely. Now, for the groceries, if it's perishable, like a carton of milk, I will have a disinfectant wipe and I will wipe that down before bringing it into the refrigerator. And for like the canned goods and things, I can leave them set in my garage for a few days or until I need them. And then I will start bringing them into the house. It's hard to wipe down everything, especially all the cardboard boxes like cereal boxes and things. You can wipe them, but it gets to be quite a lot. So you might wipe down the things that have to be brought in right away and let the other ones set because the virus has a membrane on the outside that's like the membrane of our cells, and it's a lipid bilayer, which is a fatty layer, and it is susceptible to drying. And that's why in these tests, the virus will die over time, but it does survive longer depending on the surface. And so also the packages, because so many people, use things like Amazon now, and even more so because they don't want to go into stores. Take the contents out of the box and leave the boxes outside, and then do as I recommended with the contents. If you can wipe them down, or if you can let them set for a few days, then do that, and maybe then even still wipe them down, depending on what the material is made out of. So again, that will help to keep you a little bit safer. And there was another question on, did they use the chloroquine in the SARS 2002? They did not, because SARS, the original SARS virus, broke out in 2002, and that epidemic ended relatively quickly in 2003. So they did not really have time to explore all of the different drugs. And the scientific paper that I found on chloroquine with the original SARS virus was published later, like in 2005. And so I think after that original outbreak, they were investigating many different drugs. And then they probably were following up on it. But since the SARS virus didn't come back, maybe there was an issue with getting funding because people don't think it's going to be a problem. We never envisioned that we would have this other SARS virus. But we did learn that it worked. And then they actually have tested the hydroxychloroquine against the new SARS virus, the SARS-CoV-2, and found that it inhibits that virus in the laboratory. Giancarlo, would you like to take another question or two? Giancarlo, I think you might be muted.
I don't think I see any questions for me.
Okay.
If I do,
okay, I'll work on some more. I haven't gone all the way down the list. Another question is, once we overcome the peak of the pandemic, how do we return back to a new normal? Will there be wide testing across the US to see if someone has immunity? And will those tests be effective in keeping us safe? So yes, I do think there will be testing. And what we're hearing about in the news right now is a lot of excitement about the antibody tests. And as I mentioned in my presentation, once someone's been exposed, they develop antibodies. And so you can tell if someone has been exposed or has had a past infection. So they are presumably immune. Again, we don't know for how long. sometimes when we're vaccinated as children, we have a lifelong immunity. So that remains to be seen, but we know that there would be some immunity for a certain period of time, certainly long enough to get back to work while we work on developing a vaccine. And so I think that what we'll see, though, is more kind of elbow bumps and less handshakes. I think people may still wear some face coverings. I think that's going to be a way of life. And I think that maybe the way people buy things. So, for example, some of the grocery stores are letting you put online orders in where people don't have to go into the store. Now that people are using those services, they may continue to use them because maybe they find they're actually saving time and convenience. So I think things will be different, but I think that we will get back to work, and especially this new antibody testing will help a lot. Another question is the zinc as a therapeutic. I think that the zinc, from what I'm reading, may be a good adjunct to some of the other therapies. For example, I've heard it discussed with regard to the hydroxychloroquine and the azithromycin. So the zinc may go into the cell as the virus is trying to enter, and it might block one of those early steps of the replication cycle. We don't know the exact mechanism yet, but we suspect it's going to be early on in the virus replication cycle. So I think it could be a good adjunct, but by itself, it might not be enough. And now I'm just going to look further down the list here. Actually a question for Dr. Luhrmann on the impact. What impact does national leadership and government structure brought at home impact the country's response? I think she was having some audio problems, but would you like to address that one, Laura?
Actually, I'm going to punt that one. As one of my colleagues from the School of Public and International Affairs, Dr. Lee Hanna, is going to be speaking to the political side of this next Friday. So,
yeah, wonderful. So people should tune in at that time. Okay, so another question is about the 6-foot distance for standard activity. Any sense of how long the virus in mucus can travel while running? And if you run, what's a safe distance to be at? Now, I've thought about that one because I like to run and I can't go to the gym right now and run on the treadmill. And I actually took a run the other day and I actually just put a bandana in front of my face. I felt like I did want, that was after the recommendation to cover your face. It did make it hard to breathe. I think when people are exercising, they're expelling more. And so a little more distance would maybe be prudent in that case. They haven't necessarily done exact studies on that, but you can imagine that sometimes when people are exercising, they expel more. And sometimes they might even cough a little bit depending on their own condition, their allergy season. I mean, there might be more. So you do need to think about outside activities. I know that it's been noted that even people, because they think they're outside, that they're safer, but even going to parks, they've been too close in groups, and there's been some criticism about that. So I think that if you're doing some activity that's very, creating an exertion, a little more distance may help. And then another question is about the mask. A lot of the items at the store are out of stock or not being sold to the general public. Are there any suggestions for grocery shopping without gloves and homemade masks to help prevent exposure? I actually have some scientific papers that detail studies where they've looked at people making homemade masks out of various materials, and some people are sewing masks that are multi-layered, and there is some effectiveness. I mean, as I showed on my slide, they're not going to be as effective as a medical mask, but if you're using them in conjunction with the other recommendations like the social distancing and using the wipes on the grocery cart and washing your hands and not touching your face, which of course anything in front of your face would discourage you from touching your face. So in that sense, it works even that way, aside from protecting your face from getting the droplets. So I think that I have some of those resources. I didn't list them all. And if you would like some of those on how to make a mask, I I could send you some of those links if you send me an email. But you can also search on the internet, but there are some very valid recommendations even from the CDC on that. But if you can't find them, I can help you. Any data on risk factors for HIV patients? Certainly they're in the vulnerable group. They're considered an immunosuppressed group because the HIV virus is compromising their immune system. So they would be more vulnerable to the coronavirus. But again, I don't have any statistics on that yet. But since I study HIV, I will be very interested when those data are available. Another question is, are there vaccines in development targeting multiple strains, or are they only focusing on one? That's a good question. I don't know the answer to that. I have looked at some scientific data, and I do know that there are different strains circulating. So if I was in the vaccine development business, I would be working with multiple strains at the same time. And in some cases, you might be able to put, if there's like 3 or 4 predominant strains, you could put them in the same vaccine, just like we do with the flu virus. So I haven't actually read exactly how many strains they're focusing on, but my professional opinion would be they certainly should be focusing on more than one strain. Another question is, many people are recovering, so why don't we use the convalescent plasma extensively? I think we are, and that's why we're so excited about the antibody tests, the serology that they're talking about, because then we can identify those patients. And some of them are coming forward if they actually knew they had the disease and had been tested positive, but some people were sick, never tested, so I think the antibody test would be needed to verify that. Next question, thinking about things that we hadn't thought about before. So if talking about animals weren't slaughtered, wild animal markets. So these live animal markets are a concern. They create a set of conditions where they're putting these different animal species in close proximity with humans. And so again, this is a new virus. We did not know it existed, and there probably are many more viruses yet to come that we have not identified yet. So it is a concern regarding the conditions. And so I have heard some discussion about whether some of those should be closed down for that reason. But that also is something that each country will have to decide, and maybe even on a regional basis, because those markets would be important for people to obtain food in different geographic areas. The other aspect is, as humans populate the earth and spread out, we're taking up more and more of the land where the animals used to live, or moving closer to where the animals are. So it's aside from the live animal markets, it's placing us in closer proximity to these animal species. So in that regard, we may be more likely to get these what are called zoonotic infections, which are diseases of animals that spread to humans. And another question is, will this be seasonal? It's highly likely that it will. The other coronaviruses that cause colds, they are seasonal. We see them in the winter and spring. And so that's why there's a concern that even if this new coronavirus decreases in the summer, it may come back in the fall. And when it comes back, it may by that time have mutated and be a slightly different strain. And that's what we see with the flu virus. Every year there's a different vaccine because there's a different strain. So I don't think we'll be staying at home under the severe restrictions throughout the fall. We may lift up on some of those restrictions, but I think when we catch our breath during the lull that we hope happens in the summer, we can be prepared for the fall if it were to come back. Another question is the long-term effects on the lungs. I'm concerned about that as well. So whenever there's an injury, like if you cut your hand, you know that there's a scar that would form. Well, this virus is killing those cells and injuring the lung. And so there is some concern that this will result in a scarring of the lung. And that may have some long-term effects. So some of the younger people who may not die from this, they need to consider the fact that they could have one of those outcomes where their lungs may not be the same as they were before. So everybody really should do their best to protect against this infection for themselves and for the other people that surround them, like their family members and the older people. Now, I've been talking a lot, so I don't know if Giancarlo wants to chime in. I was getting a lot of questions.
What we'll probably need to do, since it is getting close to the end of our formal time and some people may need to log off, I'm hoping that everybody can join me in a virtual round of applause for our first two presenters in our series.
Thank you very
I
much.
want
If
to
you
definitely thank the Faculty Senate Executive State. I want to thank the Executive Committee for helping to plan this event and help put together a really exciting series of speakers over these next couple of weeks. I also want to be sure to thank Craig Woolley, our Chief Information Officer at Wright State University, for helping us with all of the technical side, as well as his team. They really helped pull this off. This is an innovative format. It had a couple of glitches for some of us as we were working through, but we really like that we can come together as an academic community, even when we can't gather on our campus. We thank each one of you for joining us. Please come back next week on Friday, which is April 17th, so a week from tomorrow, at Dr. Leanna of the School of Public and International Affairs. He's going to be talking about the impact of COVID-19 on the 2020 election. So once again, thank you to all who participated for all of the series, including Be Well, and thank you for joining us today.
Thank you very much. Bye.
Thank you.